Welcome to a lecture on the public and the private keywords. So we'll be going over both keywords, the public and the private keyword, and we've come across the public keyword in previous lectures where we've looked at different classes and we've seen the class declaration includes the public keyword, and it's been a fairly common part of our different programs. On the other hand, we haven't really seen the private keyword much, so this will be one of our first few interactions with it. So let's start off by taking a look at both the public and the private keywords and see what similarities they share. So the public and private keywords are known as access modifiers. So what that means is, as you'll understand when you understand their implications, you'll understand that access modifiers basically means that they limit or they open up the access that other classes will have to them. And the keywords are also known as reserved words, so I may mention keywords or reserved words, it's the same thing. And public and private are keywords that are used in declarations for classes, for methods, and for variables. So we've seen them, for example, when I've been declaring a public class, I've been using the public keyword, and similarly for the main method. And we haven't really used them in variable declarations, but they actually become a very important part. And then in the AP Computer Science test, every class will be public. So regardless of an AP Computer Science, there's no they restrict it to only public classes. So let's look at the public keyword specifically. So let's look at the word public outside of computer science. Public means open to all. So like, for example, a public bathroom would be available to anybody from the public. The public is everybody in a community. And that's exactly what the public keyword represents in the Java programming language as well. It basically means accessible to all. So we can have public classes, we can have public methods, and we can have public instance variables. So here's the main method declaration, which is public static void main string args and then the body in between braces. And as you can see, it is using the public keyword. Now this means that this main method can be accessed by any different class or object. So as you know, right now we've been looking at different classes, and we really haven't started to create objects. So if you remember, an object is an instance or a creation of a class. So think of the class as a blueprint, and think of the object as an actual build. So a blueprint of a car and a car. So public methods or public classes or instance variables are things that are accessible to anyone. And remember, the AP Computer Science test will only have public classes. So when you have a public method, that means that as we know, classes are pieces. And let's say that you have a public method in a car blueprint or a class. And then once you create the car needs to know how to drive. So the car or the object needs to use the drive method. So then the drive method, which is originally written down in the car blueprint or the class, will need to be called upon. And the drive method needs to be public, because if it's not public, then the actual car or the object can't access that method, and it's necessary to access that method for it to work. And similarly, that same thing occurs for instance variables. The car object can access the maximum amount of fuel that can be stored at one point. And you may also be thinking that the car object doesn't know anything about the internal engine or anything like that. So that's where the private keyword fits in. So let's think of the word private outside of computer science like we did for public. And the private keyword basically means restrictive. A private property would be where it's not open to all, and it's restricted to select people who own the property or who have permission. And that's the exact same thing that the private keyword represents in the Java programming language. It's basically restricting the access. And one thing to note is that classes cannot be private, because if the classes cannot be accessed, then there's no point in creating the class, because if the class cannot be accessed, then we can't build objects out of it, and that's the entire point of the Java programming language. So then since we can't have private classes, we can still have private variables and private methods. Now what does this mean? This means that the private variables and private methods, if they're declared to be private, they can only be accessed by methods of that class. So let's go back to the example of a car, and we have a car blueprint, which represents a class, and we have a car itself, which represents an object. So the car object, it has functions like driving, reversing, turning, and all of these different actions that it has to perform must be must be public methods in the car blueprint or the class. And that's because the car object directly needs to access them. But methods like the internal combustion engine or anything internally within the car that enables the car to drive, the car object or the object doesn't need to know anything about that, and that's why it would be declared private. So that's why, because the car object has no need to know anything about these internal things that happen, that method should be declared private. And this is something known as data hiding, and it's a critical software engineering practice where you're basically only giving objects access to methods that they need, and it won't give access to other methods. So let's say we have the drive method, and within the drive method, everything that you need to do in order to make the car drive, such as burn the fuel or whatever, all the methods inside of the drive method, such as burn fuel and things like that, they would be private because the car object doesn't need to know anything about them. But the drive method itself would be public, so that the car object could access it, because one of the essential parts of a car and basically an object is the ability to be able to drive. So we've looked at the public and private keyword, we've interacted with the public keyword already, and we'll be interacting with the private keyword soon. But for right now, it's good to understand their concepts, and as we move forward, we'll be doing some hands-on programs where we'll see how changing the keyword can completely change a program.